What's it like when you experience finally a moment you've been waiting for a long time? It can be great, or sometimes it can be anticlimactic. Let's look at what happened in the life of Israel when they experienced this in the book of Joshua. This is Eric Slay with DW and Penguin, and this is the Bible commentary. As always, if you liked what you're hearing, I would ask that you hit like and subscribe in order to help the channel grow. And now, without further ado, let's get into the Word. So, today we're going to look at a large chunk of verses because I feel like these can be taken as a block and they are kind of the mirror image of some preparation verses earlier on in these two chapters. And so I don't really want to repeat themes verbatim from previous videos. So let's read verses 15 through 20. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests bearing the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks, as before. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. So, again, today we're kind of dealing with a set of verses that wrap up a two-chapter story where they stood before the land, they entered the river, they passed through the river, and now the river returned and they set up the memorial stones. It's worth pointing out here that their faith has essentially been unwavering. They entered in, passed through, and now are exiting with an almost military level of obedience. That is a remarkable characteristic of this generation. And something that would not be repeated in the future. And I think it's why this generation in particular is highlighted in such detail. It's actually interesting that in the scriptures you can see how God will sometimes highlight particular things he'll slow down quite a bit. The events surrounding the entry into the land and the capture of Jericho get 6 chapters in Joshua, and there are several more cities that are captured. Then some battles of coalitions. Then a long list of conquests that took decades. So the fact that this event got 2 full chapters tells you that it's important, even though it's never mentioned again. We have to believe that this generation never lost sight of the marvelous event they experienced that inaugurated their passage into Canaan. Just as their fathers were not supposed to forget the crossing of the Red Sea, they basically did very quickly. They wanted to go back into Egypt very soon. But certainly, God didn't forget about it throughout the rest of the scriptures. Now, they've experienced great privilege, but with great privilege comes great responsibility. And this initial encouragement was meant to bolster their faith and not be the end of their faith. It took faith to do this. Then their faith got bolstered, which was intended to encourage them to the next thing, which would be the actual approach to Jericho, although we'll see in chapter 5 that approach will involve some rather startling things that God requires them to do. Now, it's also worth pointing out that this set of memorials that they set up are not great. They are, in the earthly sense, you can think about so many human monuments that are usually designed to exalt a person, to exalt a battle, or something like that. Sometimes monuments can be good. Other times they're like what you see in Daniel chapter 3, where in all likelihood the king Nebuchadnezzar set up a monument to himself that he then commanded that everyone bow down and worship. Now, this monument, by contrast, is fairly straightforward. It is nothing special, quote unquote. It's a set of stones. And yet it would stand, it seems, for decades. And it was meant for you to go back as an Israelite and to look upon it and remember. And we'll see this in the next video. So I'll actually hold off until then, just to say that it was a memorial monument. Now, the mirror image quality of these 5 verses, I think, is also interesting, because I believe it's intended to show that there's kind of a symmetry in the life of faith, that oftentimes you have opening events that match with closing events in certain epochs of your life, be they large or small. We've talked about a symmetry in a past video, but just to say that this is another example of it again. And so, to wrap this all up, what does it look like when you arrive at the conclusion of something you've been waiting for a long time? Well, here we see it was probably thrilling and exciting, but it can also be kind of anticlimactic if our expectations are unrealistic. They're going to put stones in a river. It's great in principle, but it's not the sort of super humanly exciting thing that you would expect would be an unparalleled adventure, quote unquote, for them. So that's the answer. If you haven't found the end of the ultimate end of this life, though, then I would encourage you to consider that this life will not last forever, and so that if your sins haven't been covered by the blood of Christ, then you can have no forgiveness, and your eternity will be spent apart from God in hell, rather than with God in heaven. And so, there'll be nothing to look forward to, and the ultimate anticlimax, and far beyond that, if you don't accept the gospel. Now, this is Eric Slawick. This has been the UWM Pen Guy, and this has been the Bible Commentary.